what does it actually mean to be Protestant, and why is it bigger than any one movement?
Mm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of confusion among contemporary Protestants about what Protestantism even is. And for some people, there may be a difficult time even articulating any answer to that. For others, we might define Protestantism only negatively. Being a Protestant means you're against certain things. And there's some truth to that, of course. But I love to try to help people define Protestantism positively and to be proud to be a Protestant, because I think Protestantism is a good movement within the church. And so I define Protestantism as a movement of reform and renewal within the church that has origins in the 16th century, but also has precursors. And so we speak about proto Protestant groups, which simply means that there were Christians who anticipated a lot of the Protestant positions and Protestant concerns prior to the 16th century, the 1500s. And two of the doctrines that I think are right at the core, if we're saying what's a positive Protestant identity that all different Protestant traditions agree upon and can coalesce around, I would go to the core and say Sola Scriptura and Sola Fide. And I'll define those words. Those are Latin phrases, but they simply mean by Scripture alone and by faith alone. And you could think of this as the content and then the method. So sola fide, by faith alone, is the what of Protestantism, and sola scriptura is the how. Okay, sola fide, this justification by faith alone is sola fide. This is the doctrine that really catalyzed the Protestant Reformation, and it's the positive uh, doctrine that is being proclaimed by the Protestants and recentered and recovered and renewed within the church. But then sola scriptura is right there next to it and connected to it. And this is the idea that the scripture is our only infallible rule. It doesn't mean that the scripture is the only source for theology in any sense. The word infallible is really the key word there. So I want to encourage people to be Protestants. I think the Protestant Reformation was a good work of God in the church, if not perfect, nonetheless good. And I think both of these doctrines are true and are rallying points. And I think people today can relate to them in a special way. There's a lot of anxiety in the world right now. We're in an epidemic of anxiety. And the doctrine of justification by faith alone, which means that we're made right with God just by believing in the gospel before we do any good works, is an incredible antidote to anxiety, because it means the deepest thing in my life is now solved and I didn't have to do anything for it except receive it as a free gift. And that means everything is really going to be okay. There's a kind of settledness that comes into our hearts when we realize God is my Father and heaven is my home. And that's what justification gives to us. And Sola Scriptura as well speaks to modern hearts. It speaks to modern anxieties. Today, there's a lot of despair about how do we know anything? You know, what do I base my life on? And Sola Scriptura puts into our hearts and puts into our visibility the solution to that problem. It says, God has spoken, and this is the North Star. This is what we measure everything else by. Everything else is subordinate to the voice of God. But because God has spoken, as we believe through the scriptures, there is light in the darkness. Life is not just a pure mystery. I often think, what would it be like if we didn't have the Bible and we were just guessing about these ultimate questions, like what happens when I die and what's the meaning of life? Those are the two most important questions we can ask. What are we doing here and what happens when it's over? Meaning and death. And the Bible speaks to those questions. It speaks to our deepest condition. So I want to champion both of these doctrines, and I want to encourage people. Protestantism is good news for the world today.